Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Michelle Lohner, Senior Account Manager at Charter School Capital, and today we have Mike Mazzoni, Director of Leadership and Governance Training from Board on Track. Thank you so much, Mike, for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, we're all excited to hear some of those best tips and best practices that you have to share, to get it started. Why is it so important to put together the right board?
Great question. The governing boards of charter schools, right, have a really, really important job to do. We often talk about how the governing board and the school leadership team, so your CEO or your executive director, are really two sides of the same coin, governing and leading this organization.
Okay.
So ultimately, they've got a really important job to do. This is really the board of directors of a multi-million-dollar public enterprise. And
Wow.
so given that, and whenever we use that phrase, we usually see heads nod because it really gives it the kind of gravitas that it deserves. And we remind people that serving on a public charter school board is a part-time job and it's really important. And so we encourage people to, take it as a really serious position. So making sure you have the right people on the board in order to accomplish all of the things that a good charter school board needs to accomplish is key. This is really what we call shared governance.
Okay.
And the way that shared governance works best is when there's a school leader and a paid set of expert staff members who are there to run the school day to day. And then separately, we have a group of laypersons who are not expected to be educators day to day, who are leading and providing direction and oversight for the organization. So what we want to see with that group of lay people is a diverse background from everything related to their professional and demographic background and expertise.
So that's interesting. You were saying having, a wide background. What qualities, though, are you looking for when you're trying to build that effective, board, setting yourself up for growth?
Yeah, so there's definitely no right answer. And
Okay.
what is important is one of the things that we are promoting is this notion of being really strategic when you're recruiting your board members, right? So going back to the notion that this is a multi-million-dollar public enterprise, what we encourage people is that their form should follow their function. So
Okay.
the board that they're putting together should be specifically formed in such a way that it's designed to accomplish the thing that the board has set out to do. So just for example, let's say that if one of the things you were looking to do this year was to expand into a new location and you wanted to buy or build a new school. At that point, it might be really important to have somebody who has school financing experience, real estate transactions, school architecture or facilities experience, specifically to help the board accomplish that task of building or buying a new building. Similarly, if you were going to start a brand new capital fundraising campaign, you want to make sure you're recruiting people who have fundraising experience that they can bring to the board. What we encourage people is not to have a board that's made up of entirely educators or former teachers. One of the common things we see as people are assembling their board for the first time is that they want to go and hire and recruit everybody who's either been a teacher or worked for a school. And that's great, and we want to make sure that there's real depth in the educational experiences and knowledge, but we also want to make sure that you've got someone with financial experience, someone who understands how school budgets operate, someone with legal experience, not to be the lawyer for the board, but to have somebody who can think with a different mindset about policies and when it's important to bring in outside legal counsel. We always look to have someone with HR experience, so somebody who understands employee relations and how to build a human capital pipeline of teachers and staff, in holding your school leader accountable and doing an employee review. Having HR experience and understanding of that world is critical. Another thing that people don't think of often when they're assembling their board is having previous governance experience. So having somebody who's either served on a school board before or a nonprofit board or charitable board, again, it brings that perspective of how group processes work and how serving on a board is like serving on any other team where you want to make sure that you're working together for sort of the common goals.
So that's really interesting. You've talked a lot about the different qualities that go into making up a good board. What would you say is the ideal size of a board?
Yeah, again, I will say that there's not a specific right answer. So again, I think every board, it's important for them to say, do we have the size board that meets the needs of our organization today. One of the things we talk a lot about is how boards govern for growth. And specifically when it comes to charter schools, we know that there's a need for more seats to be opened up in charter school programs. So whether it's by serving more grade levels or by expanding into different locations, most charter schools that we work with are on some growth trajectory. Again, either adding students to their current schools or expanding to new schools. And so as the organization does that and evolves, what we find is that the work of the board just by necessity becomes more complex as well. So as the organization is older, it tends to be that you need to expand the size of your board to keep up with all of that work that needs to get done. So as a general rule, it's very common for boards, especially when they're in their planning years, maybe they haven't applied for their charter yet, or maybe they just have recently applied for their charter. It'd be very common for them to have a board of anywhere from 5 to 7 or 9 board members. My recommendation is that you do not go out and start a governing board with fewer than 7 people, because that's usually about the minimum size that we find where you have enough diversity of opinion and background, but you're also able to have a manageable size group that you're working with. And things like quorum are usually not a problem. As the organization evolves and things like the need to have really robust committee work in between your full board meetings, as that tends to happen, you need to recruit more people to serve on all of these committees and to help pull the weight of really a sustainable, well-run charter school board. So what I recommend is that once you've got your feet under you and you become a well-oiled machine, you should strive to have anywhere from 11 to 15 board members as part of your team. Again, it's important that boards reflect and say, what do we need right now? Because it's not always the right solution just to add board members. And what we find is that if boards don't have the right processes and structure in place, then once you get to 13, 15 board members, you quickly hit the point of diminishing returns. And having more board members on your team actually becomes more problematic than beneficial.
I could see that, almost having too many cooks in the kitchen, right?
Exactly, we see that a lot.
Yes. So in terms of, you talked about sort of that best practice, 5 to 7 as you're just getting started, and it grows as the school grows. What would you say, most board members, how long do they actually serve on a school board?
Right. And so what we find is, general rule is that we recommend terms of total terms on the board of about 6 years. And there are a couple ways we do that, right? The way that the length of somebody's term on a board is determined is typically by the term limits in bylaws. So we encourage every charter school board to have term limits in their bylaws, their governing documents, because to the point that we've been making, that given the fact that these charter school organizations are run by a group of interested people with all of these different backgrounds, it's important that you're bringing in new life, new blood, new experiences to the board, and that the board doesn't get stale, or very frequently we have what we call founder fatigue. If the board, if you have the same founding group of board members for 10 years, the work of the board tends to get stale, and we want to bring in that new life. So what we encourage people is to set term limits in their bylaws. What we typically recommend are either 2-year terms that are renewable up to 3 times. So you could serve for a total of 6 years. Or the inverse of that would be to have 3-year terms that are renewable twice. So again, we don't recommend serving for longer than a 6-year period on a board. It's great after 6 years to get some separation from the board, maybe take a couple years off and always have the opportunity to come back. But we recommend having some sort of structured term of 6 years at a most. That way board members have an out and they can elect to not renew their term. And then also your colleagues on the board have the option to say, we might need to now go in a different direction. And if the board members we need now serve a different purpose, we want to have the ability to, thank you for your service, and then attract a new board member to the team.
Definitely. So Mike, you had mentioned that, it's good to set terms for your board members, somewhere around 6 years. But with that, how do you ensure that you have longevity for your board when there's this turnover, every 6 years or so?
Yeah, it really all comes down to succession planning for your board members and being really strategic when it comes to your recruitment efforts. as a board. So what we would encourage people to do is on an annual basis is to be very methodical about having a conversation about their recruitment needs, and we
Okay.
want them to have a conversation about what it is that the board needs to do in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years in order to be successful, and then to recruit people specifically who meet those needs, as we talked about, the diverse skill sets and backgrounds and
Right.
experiences that we want on the board. And this is a challenge that just about every charter school board that we work with faces, is keeping a continuous pipeline of people who are aligned with the mission and then serve one of those particular purposes. And so there are a lot of tips and strategies out there that boards can use to improve their recruitment efforts that make it so that it's not just going out and finding people and begging people to serve on your board, but such that they're actually applying and knocking down your door because they want to serve and continue and further the mission. So if people are interested in finding more information on how to recruit really strategically and effectively, I know that we at Board on Track and at Charter School Capital both have resources on just how to do that. The two tips actually that I'd leave you with are,
Please.
one is to consider having a written job description explaining what it means to serve on your board. That way when people are interested in potentially serving, there's a document that you can point them to for what the expectations of their role will be.
Definitely.
And then the other thing I would consider boards to do is to consider adding people to their board who are not full voting board members, but are volunteer committee members. And so what we find is that bringing somebody into the work of the board by asking them to serve on a committee while not being a full voting board member is a great way to get them ramped up and interested in the work, so that when you're ready for a seat to open, you've got some people that you can look to who are familiar with the work and ready to get up to speed.
That makes perfect sense. They can really just kind of get their feet wet, right, and get to experience what it's like to be on a board, and then, hopefully, be ready to just step on board one day and be board president.
That's exactly right. That's what we like to see.
Those are some great best practices, and like you said, be sure to check out the website. But thank you so much, Mike, for being with us today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to our EdTalk, and hope that you have a great afternoon.